ERP failures have an alarmingly high failure rate at 80% or more by some estimates. And that's what we're going to talk about today here in our live discussion to talk about the anatomy of ERP failures. And maybe I'll learn how to speak before we get too far into this conversation here. Anatomy of ERP failures, lessons from digital transformation failures and lawsuits. It's going to be a great conversation here today. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to dive into the anatomy of what causes failure and what causes these big, massive lawsuits, and what are the lessons and takeaways you can take from this. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We also have a staffing arm of our company called Lander Talent that staffs people on ERP projects for those that are looking for contract resources and contract to hire resources. So we help companies throughout the world with their implementations. And one of the big service offerings we provide to our clients is expert witness work. So we go in and we analyze failures and lawsuits as part of litigation. Typically, attorneys will hire us to go through that process. We'll explain what that means here in just a moment. And we're going to dive into some of the lessons and patterns we see in analyzing these different types of lawsuits and failures. So a lot to unpack here in just a moment. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment. But before I do, I'd love to hear where in the world you guys are joining from today. We're streaming to LinkedIn, Facebook, X, TikTok, and other platforms. I can't remember all the platforms we're streaming to, but we're streaming all over the place. So for whoever you're listening here today or watching, thanks for being here. Let us know in the chat what city and country you're joining from, just to get a feel for where the global audience is here today. And also, if you've got questions along the way as we get into the conversation, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Any questions you've got related to failure, what causes failure, your experience with failure, or your experience with pain points and challenges with these projects. Love to hear your feedback here. So again, the topic at hand today, anatomy of an ERP failure. Joining us to unpack this conversation is Fred Hessler, who's the director of our expert witness practice here at Third Stage Consulting. Fred, thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Hi, Eric. How you doing today?
Good to have you here. And you've been on our podcast in the past. You've been on. You were on the last time you were on this podcast. We were on talking about the SAAQ implementation failure in Canada. We did a little case study on that. That's not a client of ours, but it was a publicly documented case study that we unpacked a bit. And so you have some experience having this conversation on this podcast, but we've never really just focused on in general what causes these failures and what are some of the big lessons from being an expert witness. Before we jump in with some of the questions that I've got for you and that the audience has for you, tell us a little bit about your background, and then I want to get into what exactly an expert witness is. Oh, and we lost Fred. Let me get him back in the room here. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Connection just dropped.
Oh, that's right. Did you hear my question, or do you want me to repeat it?
Nope.
Yeah. Right as I asked it, you dropped it. The feed dropped. No, I was asking it. Just describe a little bit about your background, how you grew up in this space.
Sure. I've been in information technology, enterprise software, since 1985 in various roles. And I've been in consulting since the early 90s with a lot of different systems integrators and product companies of local up to international scope. And a lot of different roles in that time, from sales to practice leadership to software development, project management, business analysis, recruiting, all sorts of jobs. And I joined Third Stage almost 4 years ago now. And since doing that, I've focused a lot of my time on litigation support activities, expert witness. And I found that the number of jobs that I've had in different roles I've had in the industry do help as good preparation for that. You understand everybody's perspective in one of these difficult situations.
Yeah, and as we'll see and unpack here in a moment, it's usually not just one person's fault or one party's fault. Usually there's a lot of blame and fault to go around in these sorts of projects. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, what is an expert witness? What does an expert witness do, and why do you like it? I know you're really passionate about this sort of thing. So just to help people understand what it is and what intrigues you about the role.
And the role of an expert witness from a legal perspective is very simple. It's to make difficult, complex, or technical information comprehensible to the court. That's really the role. And typically you're hired by one party and there's another witness expert hired by the other party to try to make that case for your client comprehensible. And why do I like it? I guess I just like the analysis of it. I like trying to unpack exactly what happened. And as you mentioned, it's never just one thing. It's usually a lot of things that have led to this unfortunate position where there's litigation or arbitration underway. And I just kind of like getting to the bottom of that.
Yeah. It also seems like one thing I've noticed about expert witness that I personally enjoy, and I'm curious to see what you think, is that, when you're actually doing an implementation, there's just so much chaos and noise and pressure and moving parts, and it's just a lot to keep up with. That a lot of times it's hard to lift your head up and stop and think and stop and look around and understand, what's really happening here. But with expert witness work, you have the luxury of being on the outside looking in. You're not caught up in the politics and the emotions and the personal nature of some of the implementations. Have you found that to be true too? It's almost like you can use that part of your brain. You can actually settle into that analytical part of your brain that sometimes you miss out on when you're actually in an implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. It requires focus and kind of calm to do the analysis. It's highly focused work, but even reading, email transcripts from inside a project or status reports, it can evoke those memories of chaos and stress and so forth from projects you've been involved in. Obviously, you couldn't do this kind of work without a pretty deep background in software development and implementation over the years. And actually, that's one of our strengths at Third Stage, I think, in doing this sort of work, is that we're not just an expert witness firm or litigation support. In fact, that's a minority of the business we do. We're ERP advisory consultants. And so we remain active in the industry and see current technology trends and trends in the industry generally. And I think that strengthens us as witnesses.
Yeah. Yeah. Having that actual real life, real time track record and experience to draw from, for sure. Want to say hello to some audience members that have commented where they're joining from today. 𝗙Ž_PR on YouTube says, hi, thanks for being here today. 𝗙ģиж 𝘁ʰebrahams joining from Cape Town, South Africa. Thanks for being here today. Ronak from Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for being here today. And love to hear where else everyone else is joining from today. And any questions you have for Fred or I as it relates to expert witness engagements, lessons from failure, your own experiences with challenges and project issues. Love to hear your feedback as we go here. Just to get started, Fred, as we dive into this here, what is if you had to, I know this is probably unfair to start off with such a narrow-minded question, but I'll ask it anyway. But when you look at some of the highest profile ERP failures that you've been involved with, what's the most single common root cause that you think executives consistently underestimate or ignore? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
If I had to pick one, I guess it would be that client executives tend to too frequently ignore just how consuming these projects are to their organization, how much of the organization's attention and energy is going to be required to actually participate in. This isn't a spectator sport. You as a client are going to be deeply involved. There's expressing requirements. There's your testing responsibilities, your responsibility to make decisions quickly and help resolve the issues quickly. Data conversion is a huge responsibility that I think a lot of client organizations don't anticipate having to be involved in. So I think that's the biggest single cause of failure, if I had to pick one. But there's another side to it too. I don't think that integrators in our business do a very good job generally of helping their clients prepare to do those things. They're not things clients do every day. And I don't think as an industry we do a very good job these days in helping clients be successful at fulfilling their parts of their obligations under these contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like also the definition of success and failure could vary depending on if you're a system integrator or a customer. I don't know if you've seen that too, where it's like SI or system integrator or a vendor might think, I succeeded. I implemented software on, maybe it was even on time, on budget.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean it was successful to the client and their end result operations. Do you see that sort of disconnect too in terms of goal alignment or vision of what success actually is?
Yeah, that's a pretty common pattern. It's not in every case. Sometimes the causes of the dispute are more technical, or they may have other motivations. But a pretty common theme is a mismatch of expectations around requirements. I have very particular functionality that's definitional to how I work. I need it to be done well, and you're not really listening to me, right? Or you're sort of hand waving it away and saying, "How hard could that be?" And so that's a pretty common pattern that'll eventually emerge as the real cause of the dispute.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. In you and I being somewhat similar ages here, you could probably relate to this or remember this, but you remember like the Windows 98 rollout back in the day, and how
Yeah,
that was at the time such a big deal. And I think a lot of executives still think back to like, oh, remember the Windows 98 upgrade? It wasn't that difficult. So how hard could an SAP or a D365 project be, right?
yeah,
It's the same thing. And I think a lot of times organizations just don't, to your point, they don't understand that it's not just a Windows 98 or a simple IT upgrade. It's a massive overhaul of your operations, which a lot of people underestimate.
yep, yeah, absolutely. And I think that integrators sometimes don't spend the time to really understand business requirements that are critical or maybe even idiosyncratic to the client organization, and that leads to these misunderstandings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to say hello to 𝗙İzh𝘁ʰim, joining from Casablanca, Morocco. I've never been, but I've heard it's beautiful there. I'd love to go sometime. Thank you for being here. And then 𝗙İzh𝘁ʰim follows up with keep up the great insights. Thank you for that. Hello to Nining on LinkedIn, joining from Indonesia. And then here's a cool name. I don't know why I like this name so much. Bobby Fisher. It's got a nice ring.
Chess player.
Yeah. Bobby Fisher on YouTube says, having no capacity for assigned and released key users is a major issue again and again on all relevant functions. What do you think of that? Is that something?
Oh, yeah. That's almost universal, that problem that Bobby's bringing up. We talk about this a lot. In fact, if I think about what advice we tend to give organizations who are embarking on one of these journeys, one of the ones we've really learned to stress is to be honest with yourself about what the organization's capacity for actually undertaking this project is. You've got key people you're going to need involved in the project. And the reason they're key people is because they're really good operationally too, right? So you're going to miss them if you take them out of operations. And that striking that balance is really critical and difficult to make. And a lot of businesses underestimate that. As I said earlier, they underestimate the degree of energy commitment they're going to need to make to one of these projects. So yeah, that happens a lot. It's a key source of failure from the client side, I found, is failure to uphold the obligations. And that usually means their participation in key functions with their key people.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, very, very important for sure. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. We know her. We know Darian. She's on our team, so thanks for being here today. And then Sevi on LinkedIn says, great point, Eric. It's an overhaul of business operations, not just a simple IT upgrade. So thanks for being here today, Sevi. So when you look at these projects that end up in lawsuits, Fred, what usually turns a struggling implementation into a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure? In other words, it doesn't just happen overnight. These failures,
Right.
you don't wake up one day and realize, oh, there's a failure. I have a failure on my hands. It's a slow, steady burn oftentimes. But what is there a tipping point or something that sort of causes it to cross over into that this is a complete disaster, we're going to end up in litigation sort of phase?
Yeah, I don't think it's a single event, but yeah, there's a tipping point somewhere. I think it's not stopping it soon enough. There's a point in troubled projects where the right thing to do is stop, right, and recalibrate it, and that could be either party saying, "I don't feel comfortable. Let's stop this." We frequently see cases where clients would have been well advised to throw a flag and stop the project and recalibrate it because they're feeling uncomfortable, almost always for very good reasons. They don't do it. Customers tend to defer to the expertise of the integrator. They tend to place a lot of trust and faith in the integrator's expertise. And they sometimes wait till it's too late to say, I don't think this is going right. It's not the way expected. But we've seen cases also where the integrator really should have stopped the project, right, to recalibrate it. And, all of us who have worked in consulting know that's very difficult for integrators to do. There's always pressure on the project team from the management to keep the revenue flowing, right, wrap this up so we can move on to the next project and so on. And pausing a project interrupts that. It puts people on the bench. It's very operationally inconvenient and financially difficult to do it. But I think I've definitely seen cases where it would have been much less painful ultimately for the integrator to do that than suffer the pain that results from trying to muscle through a project that's going very poorly, where the connection with the customer just isn't happening. We've seen situations where the customer just flatly isn't ready for this, can't participate sufficiently. We've seen cases where very arguably the wrong product has been selected to be implemented. Your chances as an integrator to succeed in those situations is pretty low. And we spend a lot of our time at Third Stage telling clients about what red flags to watch out for and how to conduct. But there are definitely red flags for integrators too.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. And it seems like even before you get to the point of potentially pausing a project or knowing when to pause the project, a lot of times it starts at the very beginning of the project. And we see this a lot because a lot of the work we do is vendor evaluation selection. We help with digital strategy and planning, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So a lot of times we're side by side with the client when this dynamic happens. But oftentimes what happens is the vendor will say, hey, all right, you signed the contract. Great. We've got a team of people that's ready to show up tomorrow. Yeah, they're going to start implementing tomorrow. And you look around and you think, okay, I'm nowhere close to being ready for this, but they're putting all this pressure on me to get started tomorrow. And of course, they'll use sales tactics like, okay, you want the A team's available now. They're not going to be available.
Right.
They're available tomorrow. And, and so you end up falling into this trap of, okay, well, I guess if we get started, we go fast, we'll get it done sooner, we'll save money, et cetera, et cetera. What often ends up happening is you prematurely staff the project. You're wasting time and money early on without having a plan, and it creates a lot of problems later on. But to your point, that there's like a conflict of interest there. The vendor is interested in pushing faster. Your interest or self-interest would be to slow things down, get a proper plan, make sure you've got your own team mobilized, make sure you've got an overarching plan for how you're going to manage the SI, all that stuff. Do you see that being a root cause, or kind of even earlier than before what you're talking about, pausing the project?
Yeah, we've certainly seen those sales tactics that you're talking about. We've got the best people available, but they won't be this afternoon, so you better sign now and get started. We've seen tactics like that. We've seen tactics like that employed about stopping projects too. I recognize we have some issues here, but if you pause this project, I can't guarantee you're going to get your team back, right? And that's, frankly, having worked in consulting firms, that's just not true. They're going to work with you and you're going to get that team back. And actually, if things are going that poorly, it's not clear to me why you want that team back. Maybe better off. But to be fair, we've also seen situations where clients have kind of dug their own grave in this regard. They've put the pressure on the integrator to get started quickly. They haven't done their own due diligence. They signed contracts after very little analysis or exploration of what the product that they're choosing is, and they've set themselves up for failure.
Right. Yeah. Very true. And I think that's the harsh reality of some of these projects is, to your point earlier about how there's usually not just one party to blame.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're an implementing organization, not that it's all your fault, but you are the person that has the most control over the project. And that's I suppose the irony of it all is a lot of companies don't act like they do, but the reality is you and your leadership team and overall organization are the ones that can affect change and improvements. But a lot of times you just defer, it's almost like you follow to a fault. You follow the lead of the vendors and they take you down a technology driven path that isn't necessarily business oriented and good for your business longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. As the client, you really have your hand on the spigot, and you've got to control that. There's absolutely a strong tendency to defer to the expertise of the integrator.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to say hello to a few more people joining here on the stream. We've got Sanjay joining on LinkedIn. Thanks for being here today. Lynette joining from Chester, Virginia. Thank you for being here today. We have Tunke joining from Izmir, Turkey. And follow-up question here from Sanjay, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Your knee-jerk reaction to this, Fred. This is a juicy question here from Sanjay on LinkedIn. What lessons do big companies like SAP learn from high-profile ERP lawsuits, or do they learn anything from them? I guess would be a better question.
They probably learn how to write their contracts more tightly.
Actually, a good point. I don't think you're kidding, are you? You're actually serious.
No, guys, I don't know. What do you think? I'm not sure. I'm not having been in one of those organizations. I'm really not sure if they learn any lessons in terms of how they actually conduct projects. What do you think?
Well, I actually, even though you were half kidding, I think that is probably the biggest lesson is what you said, is writing the contracts better. I mean, because they've got to mitigate their risk, and I don't think behaviorally they change anything, because that economic self-interest, if you think about it, think about a company like SAP, and it's not just SAP, it's Microsoft, it's Oracle, it's all these big vendors. They have so much to gain by pushing people to cloud upgrades and to push the services side of things with their partners. And the more adoption they can drive, that's the appeal. If there's an occasional lawsuit here and there, I don't know that that's enough to cause them to say, you know what, maybe we should rethink the way we operate. I think what's happening, I would take it one step further and say, not only are they not learning from it, but I think what's happening, and you're starting to see this in the EU and even with some litigation here in the US around anti-competitive behavior, potentially, or allegations of anti-competitive behavior. There's EU investigation into anti-competitive behavior on the part of SAP. Celonis is suing SAP for anti-competitive behavior with their blocking out of their technologies and the business process mining side of things. So I think what's happening is that you're starting to see regulation, and I think regulators will end up having to set the guardrails and to teach the vendors a lesson. I don't think the vendors are going to learn on their own, just because there's the allure of cloud subscriptions and all that stuff is just too great. You look at SAP stock price too. I mean, it's through the roof because they're doing a good job selling cloud adoption, even though some would say they could be doing better, but they are driving a lot of S/4HANA adoption, which investors love. It drives up the stock price, and that's their myopic focus. I don't think they're too worried about, are we going to get sued here and there? It's no different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. They've been getting sued the whole time and they haven't changed. So I don't know why that would change now.
And I was 3/4 serious about the contract comment. Actually, one of the things that we advise customers on a lot is that you really need to understand that contract. There are aspects of it that are particularly important to understand. They're not written for your benefit, right? As a client, they're written for the software vendor's benefit. And there's some things in there that are negotiable and some things that are not. But the things that are not, at least things to be aware of and understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Bobby Fisher, I'm going to keep saying the name because I like it so much. Bobby Fisher on YouTube says, keeping parallel data worlds, especially using Excel available ERP functions, is a huge risk. Organizations should block Excel for some weeks after transition. I would say I see the point here. I agree, but I think the root cause of why people revert back to Excel and work outside the system after an implementation is largely because sometimes the software doesn't fit the needs of the business. Sometimes they haven't been trained appropriately. So there's usually a deeper issue than just they're using Excel or they're reverting back to their legacy processes. That's usually a symptom of something deeper. Is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it tends to be a failure of change management, but even before that, it tends to be a failure of requirements management. It seems that recently a tendency, I believe to be true, is that integrators don't do a very good job, put appropriate attention into understanding both the physical and logical models of the current operating environments of the customer. And therefore they're ill-equipped to help the customer imagine different ways of working where they can accomplish really the spirit of the process and not just the letter of the process inside the new software. I don't think as an industry we do a very good job of that anymore. And I think that leads to this reversion to Excel habits. There are probably some people who are stubborn and just want to use these tools, but I found that's the definite minority of the cases. They're doing that because there's a thing they need to do they can't do in the software. Yeah. And you're right, the cause of that is way back earlier in the project.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key with a lot of these failures too, and the lawsuits is really getting at, you've got a ton of symptoms. Like you can point to all these things that are lurking on the surface, but then if you dig below it, a lot of times you can narrow it down to a few core things that are being done wrong. Like you mentioned, change management or lack thereof. A lot of times that lack of change management leads to things like this dynamic here, where people are reverting back to legacy systems. Oftentimes another symptom that people don't often correlate is customization. We end up customizing the software because change hasn't been managed effectively. So that's a form, it can be a form of resistance to change. It could also be that the software sucks or the software doesn't fit your needs, but it could also be that your people are partially resisting change and they just aren't open to new ways of operating. So I think getting to that root cause and attacking that is more effective than chasing the symptoms.
There's a complex dynamic that we've seen unfold in some cases, and it starts off with this. The vendor says, you're going to do fit to standard. And the customer says, we want to do that. We want to minimize customization. We really do. And in order to really do that, you need to help folks at the staff level understand how they're going to get their jobs done in the new system. And as I said earlier, how to accomplish not just the letter of the process, but the spirit of the process and get the work done. It's on you to understand that current process so you can help them reimagine it and therefore adopt it. As I said, I think as an industry, we do that very poorly these days. We show up and say, tell us your requirements. Do you have them written down? We'll just take the documents and go away, right? It's not as much conversation as there should be and collaboration. What then happens is you really get into compelling a customer to adopt a fit to standard approach. And the folks that actually do the work in the organization say, this doesn't work. This is inadequate. And the reaction to that is probably some amount of period of mutual frustration. But eventually what I've seen is the implementation teams frequently throw up their hands and say, okay, we'll start customizing things and reproducing the old physical processes you had. And that doesn't lead anywhere good either. Then you wind up, you don't get any benefit of potentially improving or streamlining work processes. You're just redoing the old ones in a different technology, and you've blown up your goal of minimizing customization. It's a dynamic we've seen play out a few times in consulting engagements.
Yeah, it's very true, and then that creates somewhat of a domino effect downstream too.
Yep.
Lynette agrees. Whoops. There we go. Lynette on LinkedIn agrees. I agree. Writing better contracts is a lesson from the vendors. Another comment here from Lynette on LinkedIn. Lynette says, I've seen effectiveness with incorporating readiness language in the RFP and contract to make sure the organization also has the resources to proceed and the implementer maintains relevant, skilled resources for effective project management and outcomes. Otherwise, pause to ensure readiness across all fronts. So that's a good point.
Is it really a lot of good points packed into that comment, actually. I've seen readiness language in some vendor contracts, some integrator contracts that are very clear about outlining responsibilities of the client organization, even imposing fines for idle time. If their unreadiness causes a delay. Some integrators' contracts are pretty terrible and they don't have anything like that in them, but I've seen some good ones where they have those customer expectations set out very clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a good way to address it for sure. Here's a comment from 𝗙Ž PR on YouTube. It says, hello again, Denise here. I was AFK for a while. I'm not sure what that means. I was AFK for a while. You guys just talked about vendors. Has the market solved the chronic problem of vendor lock-in, and has it gotten any better?
No.
Gotten worse, I would say.
It's gotten worse. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, vendor lock, just for those that don't know, it's basically when the switching cost is so prohibitive that you're, for lack of a better word, you're stuck with that vendor long term, whether you like it or not. And I think that's, it is something that not enough companies are looking at right now. I think this is going to create a wave of problems, and good news, bad news for people like you and I, Fred. I think it's going to create a lot of opportunity for us as expert witnesses in the future, in that you're going to get companies from this current generation of cloud upgrades 10 years from now, whatever it is, they're going to realize, okay, we've outgrown the system, or the technology is not a good fit as it once was. It's time for us to switch systems again, which every company does switch systems every couple decades, perhaps. But I think that difficulty of switching from these cloud platforms is going to be super difficult for companies that we haven't even seen I don't think we've even really started to see the long-term implications of that yet. But
right.
What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a really good point, that we haven't really begun to see the long-term implications of that. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And we've seen recently, kind of anecdotally, but with some of our clients, situations where the incumbent vendor is absolutely using the difficulty of moving away from them to put the screws to the client, and in terms of increasing renewal fees and so on. In an obvious way, you'd think if you wanted to keep a customer long-term, you'd try to be easy to do business with, but we've seen some situations where they're obviously taking advantage when counting on the fact that it's very difficult to migrate away from an enterprise system.
Yeah. And I think, as leaders, again, getting back to those of you listening that are not working for a consulting firm, but you work for the internal, you work for the client, the end client, or you are the end client. As leaders, it's our responsibility to not only address today's problems, but to maximize our flexibility long-term and keep options open for our organization long-term. I think the more you double down and lock yourself into one platform, even if it seems like a great idea today, stuff changes so quickly. I mean, the technology is going to change, your business is going to change. It's inevitable that over time there's going to be a drift between what the technology can do and what your business needs are. And that's why companies every 10 or 20 years go through these big, massive ERP implementations, because they, things get misaligned over time. It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of changing organizations. But I think as leaders, though, you've got to keep your options open and ensure that you're not locking yourself or backing yourself into a corner longer term.
Yeah. And to the point about understanding the contract, at least in key provisions of it, I always say that, very few people enjoy reading contracts as much as we do, but still there are some provisions you've really got to understand. And the subscription model is very different, of course, from old style software purchase agreements that were essentially one-time license fee payments with occasional upgrade fees, right? When new versions came out and so on. Now it's consistent, and your ability to exit the agreement is exceedingly limited. Absent some sort of breach that you can point to, and that requires a lot of work to get to that point. There are typically no termination for convenience provisions in these agreements. You're stuck for the term. At minimum, you're going to wind up, if you want to leave the agreement, you're going to wind up paying your monthly subscription fee for the remainder of the agreement. Worse, future payments may accelerate and be immediately due. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's best you can get some pricing discounts by agreeing to longer term contracts, but you have to consider, is it worth it? If you go and you sign a 20-year contract, I'm exaggerating, of course, nobody does that, but signing a 5-year agreement to get an extra couple percentage points may not be worth it in terms of the lack of flexibility you're going to have if your business does change.
Right. Yeah. And there's a term called optionality that some industry analysts refer to as, in terms of just, what gives you the most flexibility and options. I think, we were talking about SAP a moment ago, and it's I suppose it's easier to pick on SAP because they take this idea to an extreme, but SAP takes a very myopic SAP only approach to their customers. And that's why the EU is investigating them for antitrust behavior. And, Celonis is suing them for blocking their technology from working with SAP, and that's SAP's MO. And I think, for them, it's a good thing because it locks, if I can get you locked into a long-term subscription with S/4HANA or whatever ERP software I provide, that's just recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue that investors are going to love, and it's going to drive up my stock price. As a leader within a software vendor, I'm getting comped very heavily on how much I can lock you in. So everyone's making money and everyone's doing well with the idea of vendor lock, except for the customers. And I
right.
And I think that's where I think we're going to see a lot more litigation.
I think so too. Yep.
Yeah. By the way, I meant to mention this before, but for those of you that are interested, we have a new guide that we just released on our website. It's a ERP recovery guide, a project recovery guide. So you don't necessarily have to be in a unmitigated failure or lawsuit to benefit from this guide, but it's a way to identify risk in your project and to right size it. So if you have the sense that maybe things aren't going as well as they could possibly go, or you feel like there's opportunities to improve, which most projects do have opportunities to improve the pace at which they're going, check out this ERP recovery guide. You can just scan the QR code. I'll drop a link in the comments as well with that, but I'll leave that up there for your downloading pleasure and reading pleasure. So be sure to check that out. I also want to say hello to Dennis is joining from LinkedIn, joining from ERPfunnel.com in India. Hello, thanks for being here today. Lynette says readiness or lack thereof is a challenge with these projects, and I think we've touched on that a bit here in the conversation so far. But here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn, and this builds on a comment you made earlier, Fred. Just want to get your thoughts here. At what point does a client's failure to pause or recalibrate become part of the problem?
Well, if you look at it from the standpoint of litigation, starting at that extreme example, if there's litigation, the failure to pause to recalibrate works against the customer's interests for sure. It's very easy for opposing counsel to say, well, look, you kept paying the bills.
Yeah.
You didn't object in a way the contract demands that you object. You just let it happen. And you're in a position then as a customer of saying, well, we trusted these guys. We hired them because they're experts. And that's kind of a weak position to be in. So when you get to litigation or arbitration, having refrained from throwing a red flag and stopping the project does not help you. You're not going to get credit from opposing counsel for your patience with the performance of the integrator. Not sure if that's what Darren had in mind, but
yeah, and I think
see that a lot.
Yeah, and it's just back to that harsh reality or reminder that some may not want to hear, which is, you are in control of this project.
Yep.
You may not feel like it, and I understand why a lot of organizations feel like they're not, because the vendors in SIs, especially the bigger ones, tend to do a pretty good job of setting the tempo that they're comfortable with and setting the rules of the game that they want and that they're comfortable with, and they do it with such confidence and aggression and whatever. And it's coming from a place of experience in many cases, but oftentimes it's not a good thing just to go or to not slow down, especially early on. If you're early in the project and you're in the SI and the vendor is sending resources your way right away, something's probably wrong. You're probably not ready for that, especially if you don't have your team mobilized, you don't have your plan in place. The vendor may have their plan, but you've got all this other stuff you've got to deal with, like data migration and change management and project governance, the overall PMO, all kinds of stuff that generally is outside the scope of the vendor. But if you don't have that stuff in place, it doesn't matter if the vendor showed up early. It's still going to create problems.
Yeah, it's a lot of organizations don't have patience for this, but it's a good idea to do kind of a readiness assessment before you launch one of these things. And what you're really looking for there is what are gaps in our readiness, the kind of things Lynette's probably thinking of. Do we have data hygiene issues, right, that we really ought to address because they're going to complicate things? Do we have current processes documented? Because the vendor is going to ask for those, right? And it's going to slow things down if you don't have them. Do we have broken integrations? Do we have really obsolete technology we've got to think about disposing of in some fashion? taking some time to honestly look around the organization and kind of fill in those potholes before embarking on one of these large initiatives is a good idea.
Yeah. I totally agree. What about so when these projects fail, and again, we're not just talking about litigation or lawsuits here, but just in general, when projects have difficulties and pain points, how much of it do you think is related to the technology versus more operational, organizational types of issues?
It's almost never the software, actually. We had one case I remember where the software simply couldn't do things the provider claimed it could do. It just couldn't. It was new. It was a new variant of an existing product. In my opinion, it just wasn't ready for market yet, and it was salesmanship kind of shoved it out the door. That's not typical, though. Even when the failures that we see are really technical in nature, that failure always results from some human element, right? A bad configuration or an error or maybe even a bad decision just to pick that product in the first place. Now, to be fair, we've also seen more often cases of genuine incompetence from integrators. That isn't typical, but we have seen extreme cases of genuine incompetence, unqualified staff. I've harped on this point a lot, but failure to understand mission critical business requirements of the organization, really bad testing practices, really bad governance practices, even occasionally, and this is not typical, a genuinely unethical behavior. But we also see cases of maybe even more often than this, where the primary fault for the failure really lies with the client. It's a failure to uphold their responsibilities to the project, making delays in decision-making, relitigating decisions that were already made, right, is debilitating to a project. And even in a couple of extreme cases, some genuinely unethical and abusive behavior. Those things do happen. They aren't normal, but we do see those. So to answer your question, it's almost never the software. These are things involving people, and complex things involving people are always messy.
Yeah. Humans are unpredictable, and
yeah.
Two, no software is ever going to be perfect, but let's just say best case scenario, you find a software that can do 80 to 90% of what you want or expect it to do. It's that 10 to 20% of what it doesn't do that's not necessarily a flaw with the software. It just, for whatever reason, doesn't work the way your business works, which is understandable because every business has its own nuances. But the question then becomes, what do you do with that 10 or 20% that it's not a fit for? And it's usually not, it's usually not to try and force fit the technology into a situation where it's not meant to work. You might need a third-party bolt-on. You might need to customize. You might need to have a manual process, whatever it is. But I think the exception or the caveat I would throw out to what you just said is it can be the technology when you try to force it to do something it was never meant to do. But again, that's not really a flaw or the fault of the software necessarily.
Right.
The organizational the way the organization addresses those flaws.
Yeah, it's just a machine. It just does what it's told, right? It's not its fault. But that 10 or 20% you mentioned, that's the kind of thing that, we do software selections we're trying to tease out, I think. That 10 or 20% can be idiosyncratic things the customer does that are really important to them and their particular business. They also could be kind of odd things they could redesign, right? They're legacies of old systems and old practices. But you need to take a look at those things. You can't ignore them. And it really, that strange thing they seem to do, and we've seen some cases like that where customers do some things that look odd from the outside, and you never predict that was necessary, but it actually is. It's actually core to their operating model.
Yeah.
You want to tease those things out early.
Yeah, and one of the you mentioned earlier, you talked about fit to standard earlier, and that's a common blind spot that covers what you just said. It hides or masks what you just said we should try to draw out, in that a lot of times vendors use as a selling point, we've got best practices, standard software. If you can't figure out how to make the software work for your business, then maybe you're the problem, not the software. And so they sort of gaslight you into thinking, okay, I have to somehow figure out how this software is going to fit my business. Otherwise I'm the problem. And, you almost like clients end up trying to prove that they're capable, when in reality, it's like that software just wasn't meant. It just doesn't fit your business. Just let it go. It's okay. Like figure out, don't just try to force it into this situation. And I think that's where a lot of companies get into trouble, and they fall prey to that sales message of, we have best practices. We know better somehow because we're the software vendor that has, tens of thousands of customers or whatever. And that's not necessarily true.
But yeah, you have to ask, whose standard is this exactly? Right?
Yeah.
Who decided this was the best practice? Exactly. Yeah. And, I'm probably unreasonably cynical about this particular topic, but, to me, it often means best practice means how our software already works.
Yeah.
And there's something deficient about you as a customer that you're unwilling to change your operating model or discard these things that don't fit. And clients do fall prey to that. I think it's intimidating.
Yeah. I've had many times have I had a debate with software vendors about whether or not best practices really exist. But to your point, the cynical side of me too wonders the same thing. Is there some sort of international governing body that we don't know about? That's the International Association of Industry Best Practices, and they determine what best practices are. Obviously, I'm being facetious when I say that. That doesn't exist, but every vendor says they have best practices. And then you start to think, well, okay, if every vendor has best practices, does that mean all the vendors work the same? And that's not true either. So
it must be identical, right?
They must be identical, right? And if you turn it around on a vendor, they'll say, no, of course not. Our software is better. Well, how is it better if it's all best practice, right? You're all saying best practice. But I think if you really peel back that onion, I think you start to realize there is no such thing as best practices. But that's we could have a whole nother podcast just on that one topic.
Yeah, outside of genuine regulatory requirements. They're style questions, really.
Yeah, exactly. Frank agrees with something we're saying. I'm not sure which part, but he said great point. So thank you for whichever point.
Appreciate that, Frank. Whatever it was, we appreciate
whatever it was. We hope we were adding some insight, maybe even some entertainment and humor to your day. We're hoping for it here today. Here's a really interesting question from, actually, let me get to this comment first before I get to the question. Don on LinkedIn says, failing ERP, there's a lot to do to repair stakeholders' trust. And that's something, this is a really good point, because a lot of times companies it doesn't even cross the mind of leaders when they get into these projects. They don't even think like what not only the financial implications are of a failure, but like, how does it affect your morale? How does it affect your long-term employee experience? There's so many things that get damaged. There's so much collateral damage from these that go well beyond just the stuff that gets argued in court. There's all this other collateral damage as it relates to morale and people. Have you seen that as well?
Absolutely. We see that in a lot of organizations, because we do a lot of project recoveries where we're brought in to try to get them on track. And it's not uncommon. The organization has already been through a failure, or this one's been going on a long time before they had someone intercede in it. These things are debilitating to organizations if they're not done properly. And Don's absolutely right. The stakeholder trust, the exhaustion and fatigue and cynicism that sets in the organization, is very, very hard to recover from. It's just we sometimes see organizations and the client will behave in certain ways that we weren't expecting. And it turns out there's a reason for that. It's a legacy of some awful experience they went through with a consulting firm or an implementation project 5, 8, 10 years ago. And there's still echoes of it in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And, and then when you try to reboot or do it again, get the project going again, people doubt the ability of the organization to do it, which that right there, you're starting off at a disadvantage because people are already questioning, the path forward.
Yep. Everybody's tired. And there's a tendency to, when you've been in one of these things for 3 or 4 years and it's struggling and it seems like it's never going to end, people are already tired. If it really fails and you need a different solution or even revert back to an old one, people are exhausted at that point. And there's a tendency to just pick another one and go. Right. Yeah. And you got to give people time to heal.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you look at these projects or these failures, you could drop in or insert any vendor name, and the same thing would have happened.
Absolutely.
A lot of times you say, well, it's because we try to implement SAP, or it's because we try to implement Microsoft or whatever. Yeah, maybe there was. I'm sure there were complications or challenges with the technology. But to your point, it's usually not because of the software. It's usually the way you're running the project. That's the problem. It's more of a systemic failure, not a software failure per se.
Yep, absolutely. Doesn't almost. You're right. It really does not matter what the brand name was on the software on a lot of these cases. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one. This is a long time ago. This is actually the very first expert witness case I did. It was waste. It was waste management versus SAP, and this is, I don't know, 2007 or 2008, I think it was, when that litigation was happening. But they had tried to implement. It was an SAP failure that was the litigation, but they had tried to implement PeopleSoft, I think it was, prior to that, and they had a big, massive PeopleSoft failure, and then they cut ties with PeopleSoft and then went to SAP, and the same thing, you know, very similar pattern. And we, I don't know if I ever shared this story with you, but we, in the case, we tried to, because this was before your time at the third stage, we, in the case, we tried to show in our report, we showed that there was a systemic pattern that repeated itself in the two implementations, the PeopleSoft and the SAP. And the whole point was, it was the way the project was managed that was the real root cause. Unfortunately, the judge threw out the part of our report that talked about the previous failure, because he said you can't bring that into, you know, he basically ruled that couldn't be admissible into the case involving SAP.
I see.
You had to keep it separate. So they end up striking that from the report, and it wasn't usable in litigation. But I still, obviously, then and still do think that was a pattern that, you know, you saw a lot of the same mistakes repeated. You just inserted a new vendor name and it hoped for better results, but you got the same exact result. So that's just an early lesson for that from one of the expert witness cases we did. That was a good reminder of that. Here's a question I want to get to from Darian on LinkedIn. Where is it? Oh, Darian asks on LinkedIn, if you could force one mandatory checkpoint into every ERP implementation, where would it be and what would need to be true before moving forward? I guess, first of all, would it be one, or maybe I'll make it a little bit easier, one or more checkpoints? You know, is there one certain point or points where you would want to see that checkpoint?
Yeah. I think Darian made the question kind of more fun and interesting by making us pick one, right? One of my pet peeves is compromising integration testing standards. If the statement of work is well written, it's going to have preconditions for entry into integration tests, and it's going to have standards for how the integration test is going to be conducted. So it's going to say things like, you know, we've got this stuff done, and it's ready to go, and we're in a position where we're going to let client stakeholders drive the testing, let's say, which is good practice, right? And then we often see under pressure, when by the time you get to the first integration test, that these things kind of get compromised. Now, we said we'd have the integrations done to the ancillary systems. We kind of don't yet. And so we're going to fake that, right, by plugging data in to make processes go end to end. And, you know, we don't really trust. There's too many bugs and things aren't connected yet. So actually the integrator is going to drive the testing, and you guys can just watch, right? And so that's the first one I put in. Right. Number one, you don't get to go any further. If you published an entry criteria into SIT, and you haven't met them, stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think we have a client right now that's going through something very similar. They're at the second round of the conference room pilots and didn't get through all the stuff. Stuff didn't pass the conference room pilot phase as it should have, and they're debating now: do we just go ahead and move into the third round, or do we get this right first before we move on? And of course, there's pressure to just move on, you know, right? Because it in some ways you think, well, why slow things down? We could just keep going. And you have to look at, short term, that is going to save some time, but long term, what's that going to do? And usually the long term implications outweigh the short term.
Usually by the time you get to that point, also the planning is really not very realistic, right? You go into a compromised sit knowing there's a backlog of things that need to be addressed. So you go in and behind, you're behind by a couple touchdowns already, right? And then you do the sit in some fashion, and stuff comes out of it, other things to address. And you go ahead and schedule the next sit for 3 weeks later. How do you know? Right? You've got things you've got to address that came out of the sit, and you came into it with baggage, right? So usually there's an unrealistic assessment of how much time we're going to need to make things right to get to the next stage gate. But I think that's sort of a cultural thing in our industry in general, right? Engineers tend to be fairly optimistic, and we always think we're 90% done, even if we're 90% done for 6 months. We always think we're 90% done.
Right. Yeah. Or you downplay the risk because you feel like I can handle the risk.
Yeah, sure. What is work overtime? We'll do it. We'll get it done. If things go just perfectly, right, everything will be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. If I apply enough brute force to it, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Good points here. There's a lot of good questions coming in here. Someone on LinkedIn, I don't see the name of the person, but someone said, agree, best practices is an illusion. Here's
whoever said that, we should hire him.
I know. Yeah. Thank you. At least someone agrees with us. That's one of the most controversial things that I feel like I say is that best practices are a hoax or they're fake. And man, vendors, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me, but it's also a trigger for vendors when I say it. So I'm surprised I'm not triggering more people. Maybe I am, and they're just being quiet. They're quietly triggered. Here's a question from Ed on LinkedIn. He says, hello from Washington State. How transparent should leadership be about program issues to maintain credibility without causing panic? What are your thoughts there?
I've got a bias toward transparency in this. You're not fooling anybody, right? We've seen that control of bad news and so forth. When it comes out, and it's worse, a lot worse, because there's been a break in trust. Sure, there are going to be people in your organization who are going to use project issues that are communicated to them as an excuse for the rumor mill and so on. That happens. But by and large, I think it's better to, I think people will respond positively to the transparency if they think they're being communicated with openly and there's a realistic plan to address whatever the deficiency is. So my bias would be toward transparency.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no harm in it. And I think people would rather see that you're aware of the risk rather than downplaying it or putting up green status reports, every day saying how great everything is. And people, you're right. You're not fooling anyone. People know.
Yeah. They already know. Yeah.
And if they don't now, they're going to find out.
Right. It's going to be bad when they do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another question. I know we're a little bit over. I'll take one more audience question here. This is from YouTube. ZDAX PR says, some companies appoint data scientists to lead and supervise digital transformation. Under what conditions would it be preferable to hiring someone different with a different background? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's interesting. Data science to lead or supervise digital transformation. Well, I'm gonna have to read into the question some. I think the trickiest bit of digital transformation tends to be data oriented, right? We all know that almost certainly the data in your legacy system is corrupt in some fashion, right? Not perfect, at least. And it's really painful to figure that out and clean it up. And data conversion tends to be something that literally never goes very well in these things and requires a tremendous amount of effort. So maybe that's what the question is referring to. But the second part of the question, I'm not sure I understand. A different background from being a data scientist? Is that the question?
Well, I think it's more like, is there a different type of skill set that is appropriate for someone leading so in other words, would you want someone from the business? Would you want like either a broader technical person and or a business leader being the one to manage a digital transformation? Like what skills should, maybe we could broaden the question to what skills are important to a leader of digital transformation.
You've had a lot more experience than I have running PMOs for these sorts of things, but my instinct is always to pair them up, to have somebody who understands how to do these things, these complicated technical implementations, but has sympathy for the business, right? Sensitivity to business concerns, and then pair them up with somebody who's broadly knowledgeable about the business, understands the different constituencies and how they operate, but also has an appreciation for just how difficult these things are as technical enterprises.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, the problem if you get someone who's just a data scientist, and not to downplay the importance of being a data scientist, but if that is your main area of focus and you don't fully understand business trade-offs and business implications, that can be a blind spot. But having said that, oftentimes if you get a business person who really understands the business, they may not understand the technical implementation. So I think your point is well taken as far as combining it. If you can get you need a combination of both. It's just a matter of how are you going to set up the leadership structure to where you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen or too many decision makers that lead to no decision.
Right.
So good stuff there. Well, good. So just to put a bow on all this, or to bring it all full circle, if you had to give advice to CEOs, board members, leadership teams, project team members, one piece of advice before they approve an ERP investment, before they get started on an implementation, what would that one thing be that would be most likely to reduce risk of failure?
I think it would be to be honest with yourself about your capacity for really doing this, right? And why you're doing it. Be honest with yourself about how you're going to accommodate the fact that your best people are going to be occupied with this project probably for a period of years. And then plan your course accordingly, the pace of the implementation accordingly. And then the next step to that is, since you're going to be hiring an integrator to help you with this, hire integrators for cultural fit with your organization, empathy with your organization, who are going to honor the pace at which you think you need to go, rather than trying to rush it. I guess that would be the number one thing I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, if you do that one thing, you're not going to solve all the world's problems, but you're going to solve a good chunk of them.
Yeah.
If you do it right, if you do what you're saying well, and if you do it right.
And I got one other one too, and this is one we tell people a lot. We've talked about understanding the contract, right? That you're underneath. As an operations person, you're not going to relish doing that, right? But you've got inside counsel that can help you. So use them. But there are certain elements of the contract you really do need to understand. And we've talked about the need to raise your hand early if you're uncomfortable as a customer, right? Trust your instincts. If things don't feel right, you're probably correct, right? The things aren't on. And there are probably in your contract specified ways to protest, to raise a concern. So number one, do it, and don't wait till it's too late. Because as I said earlier, you're not going to get bonus points from opposing counsel for your patience and grace if things go really poorly. But also you have to do things in a certain specified manner if the contract calls for it. So just know what those things are. Your attorneys are going to like that and appreciate that you did that, or diligent about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the things you look for in a contract too aren't just they aren't just legal. It's not just legal terms and conditions. It's also the structural, systemic things that affect the way software is deployed. It affects the implementation. So you need someone not only that understands the law, but someone who understands these implementations, because there's pieces that might be legally sound, but it's introducing risk to your implementation anyway. So I think knowing those things and getting guidance on that is important.
That's a really good caveat. We've seen situations where general counsel for a company reviews contracts, but they don't actually understand the implications of some of the things in the contract, because they're implications to how the project's going to be governed and executed, and they don't, that's not what they do, so they don't really understand that. So that's a really good point. You need more than one perspective in reviewing that contract. To that point, though, one thing to look for in a contract and make sure it's there is to have a defined escalation path if things go wrong.
Yeah,
it should be spelled out exactly what you're supposed to do, who exactly you're supposed to speak to.
Yeah, yep, I agree. Good deal. Well, I appreciate you being here today and sharing some of these insights, Fred. This is really good stuff, and it's always good to get inside the mind of sort of like not like getting inside the mind of a serial killer, but but getting inside the mind of an expert witness. You know, like a lot of people wonder, like, what's the crazy stuff that you see and do as an expert witness? So it's good to get some of those stories out on the table. So
Great, it was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks to the audience too for the great questions. A really good conversation here today. This will become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released next week. So we'll edit this conversation up. We'll add some additional content to it and release it as a formal episode of Transformation Ground Control. You can see that at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe to it wherever you listen to or watch podcasts as well. So thanks for being part of the live production of this podcast here today. Appreciate it. And hope you have a great week. We'll be back same time, same place next week for more conversations about digital transformation, tech agnostic transformation type topics. So thanks for being here today. Have a great week, and we'll